now.
All right, good.
How is everyone?
Doing all right.
Good.
It's my wife's birthday today, so.
Oh, tell her I said happy birthday.
Thank you. All right, we're on YouTube now, so. All right. So what I will do is post the thing in the chat here. So that's the YouTube link to the stream. And let's go to Facebook. And if somebody could email it, that would also be great.
I'll email it.
Perfect.
So is it on our YouTube page? Will we, if you're just on the YouTube page, will you be
Yeah,
able
it'll
to see
pop
it?
right up that we started going live.
Oh, okay. I see.
But if anybody just wants the link, that way we can.
I'll put it on Facebook.
Okay, cool. All right.
We wait a couple minutes. Let's get everyone kind of tuned in.
Yeah, for sure.
I look very blurry and silly in the link like screenshot.
Should we make it publicly shareable? Not, I guess not.
What's that?
The link to, so that people who aren't on the Facebook page could actually join.
We can send it in email. It should be good for everybody. Anybody can click the link. But yeah, I'd send it out in the email, and I mean, if we wanted to put it on the website, you could do that, but I don't know how long that takes.
Because we can't share it from our Facebook to other folks. Because it's a private group. So I was just thinking some of the Philly plant people might be.
You could, yeah. I mean, I don't see any reason you couldn't throw it in the Philly Plant Exchange or any of the 30 groups there are
You
now.
have to make it shareable. Whoever put it up there has to make it shareable.
Can you just copy the link?
Yeah, I can post it.
Okay. All right.
Give me a second.
And then is there a way for us to view any, okay, they're there. Any questions?
Yeah, you just have to have the Facebook window, or yeah, the YouTube window open.
Hello, everyone. I think we'll get started. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin Zhang. I'm the current president of the Mid-Atlantic Carnivorous Plant Society, MACPS. I wanted to welcome you to our 11th meeting and our second virtual meeting. So thank you everyone for joining. As always, we've got an exciting schedule planned for you over the next hour or so. So we'll start with a Q&A session on carnivorous plants and their cultivation like we always do. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them out on the YouTube stream. And I already see that we have a couple of those there. So as we get those questions, we'll read them out. For those of you who don't know, every year we usually have a field trip where we go out to see carnivorous plants in the wild. Because of COVID, we weren't able to do that this year, but our secretary, Anna Mim, went out a few weeks ago and will be sharing her experience with us today. We'll close out the meeting by talking about our very first virtual auction. We know that many of you have been itching to get some plants, and we hope that you can find some that you like through our auction. Looking forward, we'll have one more virtual meeting for 2020, so please keep your eyes peeled for another email from us later this year. And before we start the Q&A and actually officially launch the beginning of this meeting, I'd just like to have the board members on call talk about themselves, briefly introduce themselves. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Anna Mim. I am the secretary. I've been keeping carnivorous plants for about 2 or 3 years. I started just thinking, oh, it'd be cool to have a Venus flytrap, and a lot of you probably know how that goes. Now I have a lot more than just one more Venus flytrap, and I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about carnivorous plants with you guys.
Hi, I'm Jackie Bowman. I'm the treasurer of the society. I've been keeping plants for about, I guess, 5, 6 years, something like that. I started with just a Nepenthes, and it kind of went on from there. I guess if I had to choose, my favorite would be all the Drosera species. So I'm glad to be here today.
Hey folks, my name is Jamie Algier. I am a board member with the Mid-Atlantic Carnivorous Plant Society. I've been growing carnivorous plants for probably around 5 years now. At this moment, the plant I have the most of is probably Sarracenia. I have about 100 of them in my yard. And also love all kinds of Nepenthes and Drosera and things like that too. So I'm happy to be here and talking with everybody, and looking forward to another great meeting and seeing how the auction goes this week. Should be pretty exciting.
Hi everyone, I'm Alvin and I'm also a board member. I started growing carnivorous plants when I was around 6 years old because of a David Attenborough documentary. Nowadays I mostly keep Sarracenia, and I have a keen interest in hybridizing them to make my own hybrids. Currently I'm a student at the University of Pittsburgh.
Thanks, everyone. So I guess we can start the Q&A session. I'll read off the questions as I see them. So our very first question was submitted by Ray. In your opinion, what is the most difficult carnivorous plant to grow? Any board members have opinions on that?
I mean, I know I wouldn't try like even growing like a cobra pitcher right now, just because, or any of the like ones that kind of need the drastic changes in day to night temperature, because that's just a little bit more work than I want to put into something.
Drosophilum can be kind of difficult for a lot of people. I think really at the end of the day, the difficulty just comes down to the grower. I keep my plants in an area that it's easy for me to give them a decent temperature change. So some of the more lowland and midland plants are really easy for me to take care of, but something that's a highland plant or an ultra lowland plant, something that I could probably never take care of in my current setup. So it really just depends. And you know, the other thing you need to take into consideration is how good you are at keeping a watering schedule and things like that. So things that keep flooded, I'm really good at, but things that need to dry out completely before I water are a little tougher, because it means you have to keep checking on them pretty regularly. So it's, you know, a personal thing to some degree, but yeah, I definitely agree with Anna that the Darlingtona and like I said, Drosophilum have been kind of challenging plants.
And I'd say that Heliamphora is a very challenging genus because you need the combination of sort of good airflow, good humidity, and cool temperatures, which is a very difficult combination to keep going.
Thanks. There's also a question from John Hollister. The traps at the top of my cephalotus are dying, although the side traps are still happy. Should I worry and change cultivation methods? And there's been actually a little bit of discussion on the chat on the YouTube, but any people have opinions on that?
I've never grown that genus. I can't say.
So
Cephalotus. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, go ahead.
So my personal experience with cephalotus, that it's pretty finicky. I think in a lot of cases, it likes a couple of months of winter rest because that's what they normally get in southwestern Australia. That being said, I've had random plants like collapse on me for no apparent reason, while other ones like do completely fine, even the same clone in the same conditions. So it's pretty hard to say what might be going on without a picture or more detailed descriptions of how it's being grown.
I'll say that John Hollister actually regularly exhibits his cephalotus at the Philadelphia Flower Show, where it is a stunning specimen. So he's asking this question, but I'm sure, you know, after a couple of months, it'll come back and look just as beautiful, if even more beautiful than before. But I also grow cephalotus. I also observe that the pictures sometimes die back, but then they usually come back if, you know, I just kind of leave them alone for a little bit. That's all the questions I see in the chat so far. However, we did have a ton of questions that were pre-submitted, and a lot of these are very timely given that it is September, late September. So one of those, how do you overwinter small pots or small plants in pots?
So most of my plants I have in pots that are small, and I just bring them into our garage over the winter, where it's cooler, but it never is below freezing, and I can kind of keep an eye on them. But it also definitely depends on the plant.
So I take a different approach. I with my Sarracenia and temperate Drosera, I have just really big pots, like 10-gallon pots that I make into these little mini bogs, and I really don't do anything other than move them up closer to the house. So the temperatures aren't killer, your number one issue overwintering plants. It's going to be wind, at least in my experience. So putting them somewhere where they're out of the wind and maybe a little bit closer to the house, they'll stay sometimes as much as 5 or 6 degrees warmer there than they would be out in the middle of the yard. I haven't had great luck keeping plants in small pots outside. There's just not enough ground to disperse it. And then when you have spring and winter and fall freezes and thaws, you'll end up getting rot if you're in too small of a pot. So having a big thermal kind of barrier there with lots of dirt and things in it seems to really help keep them happy over the winter. And at least that's what I do.
So I have a lot of Venus flytraps that are kept in kind of these small, I'm going to say like 1.5-inch round pots. So I do actually try to overwinter them, but as you've heard from other people, it's very difficult to overwinter them when the pot is so small and they're kind of not protected from the elements. But what I have found based on last year's experience is actually if you kind of put all these pots together inside a bigger Rubbermaid container, and then maybe lay the top with several inches, 5, 6, 7 inches of pine straw, it actually works really well. So, you know, even though they're completely covered and buried under these pine needles, they lasted the winter and most part came back for me this spring. We have a question as well in the YouTube chat. Is there a plant I could start with that I can just plant outside and not have to do anything super special for it?
Not anything that I can think of unless you live near a bog, because they need to be kept pretty wet and the different pH with like the PD soil, which is not typical of plants that would, of soil that is likely outside of your house.
If you're talking specifically about temperature, I would say a couple of good ones for this mid-Atlantic region would be Sarracenia purpurea. So that's native all the way up into Canada. So you can kind of, as long as you have it in the correct soil and you don't forget to water it, you kind of leave it outside year round. A lot of the other, the threadleaf sundews, filiformis, that can also survive. Yeah, also native up to Canada.
But you can't plant them in your yard.
Very correct.
You could have a like pot with the correct soil mix and, you know, dig a hole and plant the whole pot in the yard, and that would kind of make it look like it's just planted in your yard, but give it the right sort of soil.
Or just put it in a bowl with all the right soil and the
Yeah.
right, you know, situation. So you have a mini bog garden, which really doesn't, that there's a bit of effort in setting it up initially, but it doesn't require a huge amount of effort after that.
Another pre-submitted question: do Sarracenia, bog orchids, etc., require a winter dormancy like fly traps?
Yep, absolutely. There's probably a couple of exceptions, like some really southern forms of Sarracenia rosea, but other than that, they need a winter dormancy every year, 100%. Another exception is if you're raising seedlings from seed. For the first 2 or 3 years, you can kind of keep them under 24/7-hour light cycles and like pump them full of fertilizers to get them to grow up really fast. But after that, they need a dormancy every year.
An interesting question from the YouTube chat: are flytrap cultivars as hardy as regular ones for the winter? Should red dragons, B52s, etc., go inside in a cool spot, or can they stay outside under a pine needle blanket?
I think you grow the most fly traps, Kevin.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're the expert.
So I personally haven't observed any difference amongst the cultivars. I will say that the larger the plant and the larger the pot that it's potted in, the better chances of it surviving over the winter. So red dragon, for example, is just notoriously a slow grower, as are most of the red Venus flytraps. So as a result of that, they tend to have a harder time, but that's probably just because they're smaller to begin with. All my fly traps I just keep outside under a pine needle blanket. Okay, more questions. I would like to know what to do to improve my Highland Nepenthes terrarium.
Well, depends on what condition it's in right now, but I mean, you need it to have the right temperature, you need the right humidity, you need good airflow.
Yeah, those are good points. So in general, whatever your situation is, if you can aim for a daytime temperature of around 70, that would be good, and a nighttime temperature is around 50. So whatever kind of setup you use, whether it's putting it in your basement, manually adding ice packs, or if you have a setup with a refrigerator or an AC, just shoot for those temperatures, have high light. Those are really the main things to look out for. Interesting question in the YouTube chat. I've just hand pollinated one of my female Nepenthes using a few different males from other growers. What should I be looking for in successfully pollinated pods? Will I not know until I see the seeds?
So, and I'm not sure when Just was. If Just was in the springtime, then right now is when you're starting to see fully formed Sarracenia pods, at least in my experience. I have, I don't know, a half dozen or so of them. But if it was successfully pollinated, the pod will get larger and swell up. If it was not successfully pollinated, you'll just kind of get a little nubbin that'll fall off eventually, or what you're looking for as far as that goes. In my experience, it takes 3 to 4 months for the seeds to mature. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but that's at least what I've seen.
Here's a pre-submitted question. I have a couple of young Nepenthes sanguinea. I am new to growing Asian pitcher plants. Since they come from a tropical climate, can I assume they won't go into dormancy like some North American carnivorous plants will?
Yes, I would say yes.
Yeah, so
and just keep them in a tropical, you know, look up what their environment is and then try and keep them in that. I have one that I have in my basement in a terrarium. So you know, the temperature is reasonable, and it seems to do fine.
Any other questions? I see in general a lot of questions about overwintering, dormancy. Would the board members like to talk about a little bit about how they keep their strategies for keeping plants over the winter?
Well, like I said, I don't have many that have a real dormancies. Most of mine are tropical, so I just take them from outside into my basement into empty fish tanks and make sure that, you know, I have the right, you know, humidity and lights, etc. in that situation, decent airflow. And sometimes I've actually used filled water bottles with water, put them in the freezer, and then in the evening move the frozen bottle into so basically back and forth with frozen bottles to kind of bring the temperature down just a little bit if needed. It's quite labor intensive, but if you really care about the plant, then it's worth doing. When you turn the lights off, if you go down and turn the lights off, then you just move the frozen bottle into the tank.
So right now I primarily keep Sarracenia, and then like I said, intermediate and lowland carnivorous plants. So regarding my Sarracenia process, it's kind of just as I described earlier. I take those bogs. I do like using a pine blanket, or if you don't have that, I found a few layers of burlap helps, something like that. I cut all my the pictures back unless they're really nice and green, and then I'll leave them, or the photophylla. And I'll just cover them up, push them up against my house, and I really don't bother them until, I don't know, February time, January, February, depending on what the weather looks like. If it's still cold, we'll wait until it warms up, just whenever we start regularly getting into the 60s, sometimes March, whatever. I'll pull all that off and just let them go, put them back out in the full sun, and they tend to do pretty well. So it's not a labor-intensive process as far as I'm concerned, and you don't really technically even need to cut the pitch back, but I find that it helps to control any pests or bugs that might try to nest in there.
So I've got a pretty decent sized Sarracenia collection, and I basically keep them in the same trays that they grow in during the growing season. I don't change anything about that, but I mulch them all with about 6 inches of pine needles that I collect from my backyard. Pine needles are really nice because they don't tend to break down too quickly, and they don't tend to grow mold or fungus either, which is an issue you'll have if you use straw or something like that. So I mulch them with a thick layer of pine needles, and then I secure the whole thing with burlap so that it doesn't blow away. And typically they're covered from around November-ish to March, whenever there's like a danger of sudden frosts or late frosts. The main concern with the Sarracenia specifically isn't necessarily low temperatures. They're probably good until like even 0 degrees Fahrenheit if you cover them really well. The problem is with sudden changes in temperature. So constant freeze thaw cycles will turn the rhizomes into mush and cause you a massive headache in the spring when all your plants are rotting. The method also works with Venus flytraps and temperate Drosera too, so those can all stay in the same place.
Got a question in the YouTube chat. I currently rely on electric heaters to keep my greenhouse heated through the winter. I want to get a backup heat source in place. Has anyone tried a propane fueled heater? I worry about the exhaust. Or any other heating suggestions for a 10 by 12 greenhouse?
Is it outside the greenhouse? Do they say?
I assume it would be.
Okay. Yeah, because it's not, some people have greenhouses in their basement like me. I mean, the heating source I use for mine is I have a big fish tank in the greenhouse that's heated that helps to keep keep it warm. But that's obviously in a basement. That's not outside.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that the board members on call have experiences with a greenhouse. So I currently, I mean, I live in an apartment, so I do not have access to a greenhouse, unfortunately, although I would love to have one. However, I will say we have a pretty active Facebook group, and I'm sure you can find someone on our Facebook group who will be able to answer your question. So sorry about not being able to answer it now, but please do go look on our Facebook. All right, I think we'll stop the Q&A session for now. Anna, would you like to talk about your field trip experience?
Yes. I am going to share my screen. All right. So like Kevin mentioned, we usually go on a field trip to visit carnivorous plants in the wild, but we did not this year. We are hoping that next year it will be safe for us to all get together and go on a field trip because they're really fun. And this is a place that we could potentially go to next year. So I visited Nassawingo Creek in Snow Hill, Maryland twice over the summer. It is on the eastern shore. So the Nassawingo Creek Preserve is owned by the Nature Conservancy. It started with a gift of 154 acres in 1978. Since then, it has expanded to nearly 10,000 acres along Nassawingo Creek. Much of the land actually used to be a pine plantation. So some areas, the only trees that are there are loblolly pines, which is a native pine species, but still is not desirable to have that as the only tree growing there. So they are working on thinning the pines to create a more diverse habitat to help return some of the areas to wetland and to have a more open canopy. The pines that they cut down are actually logged and sold, and then the profits go back into maintaining the preserve. So it's sort of a win-win for them because they're able to make some money off of this, and then they're also able to get the habitat back to more what it was like before it became a pine plantation. So this is a picture of a logging road through the preserve. It is home to the second northernmost bald cypress swamp, which is what's pictured in this picture here. It was the first time I had ever been to a bald cypress swamp, and it was just really cool. I had never been anywhere like that before. You can see in the picture, there are these little things sticking up out of the water. They're actually called cypress knees. It's part of the tree. I tried doing some research to find out what they are for, like why these trees grow these sort of weird like knees that kind of stick up out of the ground. And as far as I can tell, scientists aren't really sure either why it happens. There's a few speculations, but nothing definitive to say like why these trees do that. Then the area that has carnivorous plants is called the Delmarva Bay Fen, which is a rare type of wetlands with only 3 known locations. 2 are in Maryland, and the other one, I believe, is in Delaware. It's characterized by seepages fed by groundwater along stream corridors and open herbaceous vegetation with few shrubs, deep peat soil, and the particular site that I visited that had the carnivorous plants had a tributary running through it. And the pH is pretty low. It's about 4.5. The plants. So there's a pretty dense population of Sarracenia purpurea. There's also Drosera intermedia and roundifolia. Something pretty cool about this site is that they have the first sighting of dwarf sundews in Maryland. Drosera brevifolia was found in 2019 in Nassawingo Creek. They also have rose begonias and 13 other orchid species. So here's a photo of the Drosera brevifolia. This was not taken by me. I was not fortunate enough to actually see any of them while I was there. So this is the guy who took the photo. So one of the ways the habitat is managed naturally, especially in the past before there was more human interference, is through fires. So the fire burns undergrowth and brush, and the pitcher plants would die back, but the rhizomes underneath the ground would survive. And after the fire was over, they'd focus heavily on pitcher production. They would have a lot more light available to them since all of the brush was gone, and they would be able to grow back larger than they had before the fire. And this also acts to just kind of keep these open canopy spaces as other plants, all of the brush is, killed back, but the pitchers and other carnivorous plants are able to come back after the fire. And flooding is another way that plant populations are controlled. There used to be a lot more beavers in the area, and flooding was more common. Now there aren't so many, so flooding is not very common there, but that would also prevent seedlings from surviving to keep the more open canopy layers. Yeah. So now the Nature Conservancy actually uses prescribed burns to help keep woody plants under control and mimic natural progressions. They also use extremely targeted use of herbicides for invasive plants like Phragmites. The person who I talked to there, who Chase McLean is the preserve manager, said he actually takes herbicide and applies it to a glove that he wears, and then just wearing the glove will just touch the plant that he wants to die. That way he can get rid of these invasive plants that would take over while not risking any like spraying that would hit the plants that he wants to stay there. They also do a lot of manually cutting and removing woody shrubs. So the area that the carnivorous plants were in, you could see where they were kind of cutting back the woods to keep this open canopy area open. And the pitcher plants that were really close, like right on the edge, were the bright green, like the one that I showed you before. And then as you got farther out, even just a few feet, you could see them starting to get the really pretty veination and the darker red colors just from the more sunlight available to them. And this is a photo actually from one of their prescribed burns in 2019, kind of the aftermath, where you can see like how the trunks of the trees are all scorched and the ground is all scorched, but that allows other plants to grow after this. Here's another photo of them doing their prescribed burn. Visiting. So here is a map that shows about where it's located. It is 10,000 acres, so that's kind of approximate. So Ocean City is right here. Salisbury is here. From Philadelphia, it's going to be about a 3-hour car drive. From DC, 2.5 hours. From Harrisburg, it'll be about a 4-hour trip. So the whole Nassawengo Creek is open to explore. There are no hiking trails, but there is a logging trail that you can go through. It's a pretty wild place. I mean, it's intended not to be a place for a bunch of visitors to go to, although they do like when people come visit. So it's more just to have a natural, like wild space. So there aren't any facilities there. I think it's a pretty great place to visit during COVID because, I mean, we didn't see any other people there. It's outside. It's definitely a pretty nice way to spend the day with a pretty low risk of encountering anybody. And I know it can be maybe like a little discouraging, I guess, to want to visit somewhere where there's like no real trails through there, but I definitely encourage you if you are able to do that, because it is pretty fun just to go out and kind of, I mean, we spent a few hours just going through the swamp, and it was pretty just exciting and cool to go, and like, you're not really sure what you're going to see or where you're going, but it makes it pretty fun. And this picture here is of a little baby Sarracenia. Most of the reproduction is through rhizome, but they do get some reproduction through seedlings. So you can see the hand there for scale that is a very small baby. So there's no trails on the preserve, but Furnace-Town, which is located kind of in between Nassawenga Creek Preserve and Pocomoke State Park, offers hiking, including a boardwalk that goes through the cypress swamp. So you can go to Furnace-Town and then take a trail that kind of goes right through the cypress swamp. So what you will see, in addition to the carnivorous plants, there's bald eagles. We saw a lot of snakes, some irises. I saw a river otter, which was cool because I'd never seen one before. The cypresses, and then the plants that I talked about, and toads. Saw a lot of toads. What to bring? So you definitely want to bring bug spray with DEET and use it heavily. I'm sure it's not as bad now because there should be less mosquitoes, but when I went in July, it was pretty bad. And I pulled more ticks off of myself than I ever have before. Definitely bring a lot of water because there is not a place to refill it. I suggest bringing boots that can get wet and also a change of shoes and socks so you're not stuck wearing wet socks on the way home. Long sleeves and pants are recommended for tick and mosquito prevention. And just as a note, even though it is like a wild space, you are not allowed to bring dogs onto the preserve. But if you go to the trails, the Pocomoke ones or the Furnace-Town ones, those you are allowed to bring dogs. What to do around Nassawenga Creek, since it is pretty far for a lot of people, if you want to make a day trip or even a weekend, there are things around that you can go to. So kayaking Nassawenga Creek is really perfect for the fall. I'm hoping to have time this fall to go back there to kayak like through the swamp. There is a boat ramp that you can use. Assateague Island State Park is about 30 minutes away, which is a beautiful beach with wild ponies. And there are campsites available there. And Ocean City and Bethany Beach are also close by. I want to give a huge thank you to Chase McLean for showing me the site and also to the Nature Conservancy for preserving a beautiful piece of the wild. You can also learn more about the Nature Conservancy and donate to preserve more wild spaces at nature.org.
That was awesome, Anna. Could you
Thanks.
just speak to, it makes me want to go immediately. Can you speak to the time of the year, what you might see at different times of the year, if you have any sense of that? Like what would be a good time to go? Like what would be there, say now, or is it worth going in the spring? What sort of time of year would you recommend?
I mean, I think now definitely would be worth going. I think the spring would be too. None of the pictures I saw were like flowering when I was there. The second time, because I ended up going twice because the first time I didn't actually see any carnivorous plants. Although I don't even regret that because going through the cypress swamp was really, really amazing. And if anybody else has questions, in the YouTube chat, I will do my best to answer them. I'm definitely like not an expert on the space. I just kind of went there, so. Let's see, we have places to rent kayaks around there. I know there is a place and I cannot remember what it's called. And I also am not sure if they are operating right now because of COVID, but that is something that I can look up and post on the Facebook page. Is this a knee-high or a waist-high water situation? Going through the swamp is definitely a waist-high water situation. Through where the carnivorous plants were, that was like, I think my ankles got wet, but definitely not my knees. And it was a little bit wetter there than it normally was at that time of year. He said, Chase McLean said that in the winter is actually when it's the wettest he finds in the site where the carnivorous plants are. And that was kind of odd. The time I went was right after we had had a few tropical storms. So he said it was a little odd. What orchids are there? I know the rose begonias, and I cannot remember the other kinds. I did see one and it didn't have flowers on it, and I also don't remember what kind that was. But that is something else that I can look up and post on the Facebook page. I wish I knew the answers to all of these, but like I said, I'm certainly not an expert on the space. I just went to visit, but I will make a note of that and find out and get back to you guys on that. I know there was one type of orchid that after they did one of their prescribed burns, this orchid like popped up there and they hadn't ever seen it in that area before. So that's something else to attest to the importance of like allowing these sort of the natural fires to do their thing.
Thanks, Anna. That was awesome.
Thanks.
So I think we can start on our last agenda item. So we'll talk about a little bit about the auction. And Anna's also been organizing that. You want to kind of mention our rules?
Yeah. Do you think I should share my screen and bring them up or just talk about them?
Either way is fine.
Okay. I'll just talk about them. So this is our first ever virtual auction. We are really excited to be hosting an auction for our members in these difficult times. Please understand that this is our first auction. So although we have tried to be like really thorough figuring out how everything is going to work, some things might not work as well as they should. So to please be patient with us. So in order to participate, you are required to read the rules, which are listed on our separate auction page, or it's a Facebook page. And anybody can bid on items, although items can only be shipped within the United States. And we limited the sellers into this auction to a small number of people just to be kind to ourselves so that we're not taking on more than we can handle. The auction will be, I think it is actually all carnivorous plants, or almost entirely all carnivorous plants. We do not permit the selling of plants that are collected from the wild. And ensuring that the health of the plant is the responsibility of the seller, and the club will not be responsible if any unhealthy plants are sold. So listings will be live on the Facebook auction page today at 5 o'clock. And we're going to allow people to ask questions about any questions they have about any of the plants under each post until Monday, September 28th at 8 p.m. And then bidding will begin at 8 p.m. on Monday. After that, the comment section will be restricted just to bids, and further questions can still be directed to the seller via email. But if you do post something that is anything but a bid under an item after that time, we are going to delete it. So the auction is going to end October 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bids placed at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or after will not be counted. Bidding is pretty easy. You just need to comment under the auction item with the amount that you want to bid. All bids must be placed in whole dollar amounts. They should all of the items have a starting bid that the seller has determined. So the starting bid must be $5. So you can't bid anything less than what the seller has determined for the starting bid. Some items also have a buy now option. So if you see a plant that says buy now for 20 bucks, you can either choose to just buy it for 20 bucks and then you know you get it, or if you want to take your chances, you can try bidding on it. The auction will be conducted via Facebook, but if you don't have a Facebook, we definitely encourage you to make one in order to easily participate. But if you really hate Facebook and don't want anything to do with it, all auction info will be available on our website. And if you see an item you want to bid on, you can email info@macpssociety.com with your first and last name, the items you want to bid on, and the maximum bid for each item. And then one of our board members can act as a proxy for you to place bids in your name on the Facebook auction page. We will certainly do our best to keep the auction page up to date with the bids you request. However, please understand that this is no guarantee that you will win an item. The buyer will be responsible for paying shipping. Each item will have an estimated shipping cost listed, but please note that the actual shipping will depend on the buyer and seller's location. After the auction, the winners are responsible for contacting the seller of each item they won by no later than October 13th, 2020. Then the buyer and the seller will determine the exact shipping cost. After the shipping cost has been determined, the winner is going to pay MACPS the full cost of items and the shipping. And you have until October 16th, 2020 to pay us. And then the MACPS will pay the seller their portion of the money and the shipping. The seller has until October 23rd, 2020 to ship the items, but no items will be shipped out until we have received payment. Please only bid on items if you are able and willing to pay for the item, including shipping. If you realize that you aren't able to pay, please contact the seller and MACPS as soon as possible, and then the next highest bidder can get the item. If the buyer does not pay by the October 16th deadline, the item will go to the next highest bidder. To pay, you can pay treasurer@macpssociety.com using PayPal. We are only using PayPal for as a means of payment for the auction, but you don't actually need a PayPal account to use PayPal. The buyer has to have a separate PayPal transaction for each seller they are purchasing from. But if you purchase 2 plants from the same person, you can just have one PayPal transaction for that. But if you purchase like 1 plant from person A and 1 plant from person B, you need to have 1 transaction for person A and 1 from person B. And you need to include your first and last name, your email address, a list of each item won, including the price, the cost of the shipping, and the name of the seller. And if you do not include this information, it may result in the payment being refused by MACPS. And I know this is a lot of information and it will be emailed out to everybody, and it's also posted on the Facebook auction page. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now and we will answer them. And if you have any questions later, you can email info@macpssociety.com and we will answer them. So oh, okay. There you go.
We should also have 2 of the sellers available. I think they're on the YouTube page. Wondering if those people can actually join the Zoom link and show off some of their plants. Hey, Casey. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Feel free to talk about your plants whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I have a few of them in here. Hopefully this works. Can you all still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I've never done this before on Zoom and YouTube at the same time. So this is one of the Venus flytraps I have.
Hey, Casey. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes, we can hear you. Feel free to.
Okay, sorry. Can you still hear me? Sorry for the technical hiccups. So this is one Venus flytrap I have. It's the WIP Slim Snapper. I have them as just one single rhizome like this one, or I have some also that have 3 rhizomes in one pot. They're pretty decently sized nursery pots. I like to give them some room so that the roots have a lot of space. The petioles on this cultivar can get up to 6 inches long, and the traps can get pretty big too, up to 2 inches long. And for me, they're really easy growing and vigorous, and they're pretty fun. They're noted for their long petioles. I have another Venus flytrap cultivar, the Gremlin, which is from California Carnivores, from Damon Collinsworth. And it's mostly green. It's not a true anthocyanin-free variety, but it makes a lot of really green traps. It bunches and divides really rapidly and quickly, and it's also super vigorous. So I have 3 of these that have 3 rhizomes each in another pretty big nursery pot. I also have a few Sarracenia. They're in super big pots, so I didn't bring them inside to share. But it's one of my favorite Sarracenia to grow. It's a Flava Oreophila hybrid that I picked up at an auction at the Bay Area Carnivorous Plant Society about 10 years ago. And it's really rapidly growing, really vigorous, foolproof. It survived all sorts of things like falling off a balcony and other things. And I've had it for almost 10 years now, and it's just divided and grown so huge that I have several large clumps and divisions of it. And it's the earliest of all of my Sarracenias, so it comes out first in the spring, but while a lot of the other carnivorous plants are still in dormancy or just starting to put up some new traps, it's already in full swing. It makes almost purely green traps, really large and tall. And yeah, it's one of my favorites, has yellow flowers. So I have a few different sizes of that for sale. I'm in the Philly area, in the North Philly suburbs. So if you're local, I'm happy to pick up or drop off plants. Yeah, so that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you.
Great.
And that was one thing I forgot to mention in our rules, is that if the seller wants to have like a pickup option and you are local and live near them, that is absolutely fine, and then nobody has to pay shipping, but that is up to the seller to determine if they want to have a local pickup option.
Jerry, are you on the line?
Them, that is absolutely fine, and nobody has to pay shipping, but that is up to the seller to determine if they want to have a local pickup option. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, I'm here. When Casey was speaking,
Jerry, are you on the line?
I am.
Jerry, mute your YouTube because you're simultaneously streaming on both. So just mute the YouTube link.
Okay, wait a minute.
And that is absolutely fine, and nobody has to pay.
Okay, is that working now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So I ran outside and got the plants. I got to see. Oh man, now I'm dripping all over. This is my Sarracenia purpurea. And I don't know how well you can see it. Let's see. Can you see it all right?
Pretty good, yes.
All right, because I'm just looking at the thumbnail. All right, so it's in I guess it's about an 8-inch pot. And this plant has actually has 2 Canadian St. John's worts. It's nothing really fantastic. Let's see. So this is it right here. You're not going to see much. It has a really tiny yellow flower. The only reason I keep it in there and don't just pull it out is because it's a bog plant and I have hopes of one time making a bog. I happen to notice that there's a Venus flytrap seedling in here also. And who knows, I might find some sundews in it once I unpot it. I'm gonna sell this. It's just a standard open pollinated Saracenia purpurea. I get it from a guy that lives near me. He has got a wholesale greenhouse out west of the Poconos, and he sells them to me for his price. So that plant I've had at least for 5 years. I don't know exactly how long. And then I've got a whole bunch of Drosera intermedia. This pot is just an example. These plants are starting to form hibernacula now. This particular pot, ah man, I gotta catch the drips. Okay, so this particular pot, I don't even know how many are in it. I'm just gonna sell in groups of minimum of 5 each. I'm sure what I'm gonna do is just take them all out and divide them up by 3. So you're gonna get a minimum of 5, but I'm gonna guess you might even get 10 plants. I just don't feel like counting them. There's just too many. I planted these this spring, except for this pot. This pot was just hanging around. It's got a lot of moss, so I've got to pick the moss off. It's not sphagnum moss. I've got to pick it off of the plants. And it also contains a couple of yellow-eyed grass, Xeris species. I'm selling that as well. All right, so those are my plants. Anything else?
Thank you, Jerry.
Okie doke. So I will mute.
Thanks, everyone. So with that, I think we will conclude our meeting for now. But please look out on our Facebook page for more information about the auction. And we hope to see some exciting bidding going on.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Goodbye.